I think we're ready to start. So thank you everyone for coming today and joining us for the How to Stand Out in an Interview panel. My name is Kelsey Nager, and I am the Employer Experience Coordinator at the Career Development Center, and I'll be monitoring the panel today. And then I'll let my colleague Emily introduce herself.
Great, thank you. Hi, my name is Emily Bax. I'm a career counselor here at the Career Development Center at USD. And we're joined today by Danielle. I'll let her introduce herself.
Thank you. Hi, everyone. My name is Danielle DeBrini. I'm actually a USD alum. And since graduating, I've been working in recruiting specifically for biotechnology and medical device companies, but I've hired for all different types of roles and done many, many interviews. I currently work for Dexcom. It is a San Diego-based medical device company. And I'm the recruiter for Campus and Diversity. So I run the internship program and some of our recruiting programs for diversity as well.
Perfect. Thank you, Danielle. We're excited to have you today. A few housekeeping items for students. If you are here and wanting to receive CRP points, so Compass, Passport, or Connect points, all you need to do is stay through the end of the session, and we're going to be using the Zoom attendance report to send those points off. Please do give it a few days because we're uploading everything manually right now as we are remote. And then if you have questions, we'll have some time throughout the session for you to ask those questions, and we'll also have time at the end. So today we're going to be reviewing interview preparation techniques on how to stand out in an interview, as well as some virtual interviewing tips. We'll discuss some day of interview things you will need to stand out, and then we'll also review some post-interview items as well. And after each session, we'll have some Q&A. So if you all are ready, we're going to kick it off with the first section, which is interview preparation. Just to give you a sneak peek, these are the questions we'll be asking the panelists, and then we'll open it up to all of you to ask a few, and then we'll move on to the next section. So let me stop sharing so you can see the faces of the panelists more easily. And then we will start with, let me get out of the presentation mode. The first question is for Emily. How should students prepare for an interview?
Great, thank you, Kelsey. I think preparing for an interview is a great way to help calm your nerves as well as information ready. So what I recommend when I'm working with clients preparing for an interview, first is know yourself, know what it is that you have to offer and what you want to share during this interview. And the other piece of that is really knowing the company and the position. So research the company, the position. You want to know about more details about the company, what they do, but also why you want to join. So being able to have that information. And then in terms of what you want to share about yourself, really think about experiences, skills, personal qualities, anything that will benefit the company and make them see why you'd be a good fit.
Great, thank you, Emily. So the next question is for Danielle. What kind of information should students research about an organization or an interviewer?
Yeah. So the first two questions I typically ask a candidate is, what do you know about, in my case, Dexcom or whatever company it is, and why are you interested in the position? So for the first part, I would definitely research the company website. So I would kind of draft out your own statement to who the company is, what's their product or service, or whatever type of company they are, and their mission. So I would definitely have that to have an answer to what do you know about our company? And then why are you interested in this position? Definitely study the job description and know exactly what position you're interviewing for. And then to echo some of what Emily had said, definitely know a little bit about what you want to share about you and why you're a good fit for the position. And then kind of bonus points, you can also follow them on LinkedIn or check out some of their news articles just in case you we'll see any announcements on new products coming out or any recognitions that they might receive. Those are also things to research before an interview.
Great tips, Danielle. I definitely love the research, different products or things that are happening currently in the company so that you're most up to date with what's happening for the interview. Thank you. So this next question is for both of you. What do you recommend a student wear to a virtual interview?
Danielle, do you want to start?
Sure, I can start. So this is kind of, I know, a difficult question, and a lot of the times it's ever changing. I mean, for the most part, you might start out with just a phone interview, or you'll receive an email from a recruiter or maybe a coordinator. I would just ask them if you're unsure or worried about it. But just as a rule of thumb, I would probably recommend to be a little bit overdressed than underdressed. Even if they say it's a very casual environment, I would still go at least like, you know, a little bit more formal than you think. So if they say that, even if they say they're like a t-shirt and jeans type of environment, let's say they're a startup, I would still wear at least a collared shirt or something. But for most interviews, I would say that you're going to be safe wearing a dress shirt with a blazer to be presentable. Obviously, if it's a creative industry or something, you can wear brighter colors. If it's a law office, you might want to wear a suit. Use your best judgment. But I would say dress shirt and blazer might be the best call.
Great. I totally agree with everything Danielle said. That's really what I tell my clients is dress a little bit nicer than you think you might need to, a little more than you would be wearing to the job day to day. It just shows that you really care and that you're trying. And wear what feels authentic to you, though. You know, dress in a way that is professional, that you find professional, but however it is that you want to express that. And a lot of that will vary by industry for sure.
And a few resources that the Career Development Center has on hand to help you with what to wear or what might be best appropriate is we have a Pinterest board that explains what business casual may mean or business professional. So that information will be sent out in a follow-up email to you after this as well. So you can poke around and ask questions after you see that too. Okay, well, that concludes the first portion of the panel, which is the interview preparation part. Are there any students that have questions about that piece particularly? You can text them in the chat or you can unmute yourself and ask. Okay, well, we'll also have time at the end for questions. So if you think of something in particular that goes with interviewing preparation, feel free to ask it later on as well. So the next section, I will share my screen again and show the questions, is virtual interviewing tips. So techniques that one recommends, tips about body language, eye contact, and then how early should you log in. So the first question is for Danielle. What are technical tips you recommend for students for virtual interviews?
So on the actual nitty gritty, I'm probably not the best resource, I have to admit. We were just chatting about some IT issues that we'll have, but really just test it out, I would say, ahead of time. I see that the Career Center offers mock interviews, which is awesome. So definitely try scheduling one of those ahead of time before your interview. Go to the actual place that you're going to be when you have the interview and see if the connection works. Even test it out with a friend just to make sure that there are no glitches or that your sound isn't working or something like that. I would definitely recommend doing that. And then just on the background and everything, I've done so many different career fairs this year, lots of very distracting backgrounds. I get that, you know, we're in an unusual time. And while your dorm room might have some really interesting and fun decor, it's also very distracting at times. So don't be afraid of virtual backgrounds. As you can see, I'm definitely using one too. So yeah, I would probably say the biggest thing is just try to test out all of the technical aspects before audio, connection, etc.
Great advice. I know even Emily in our office loves to test her lighting all the time with the team. So feel free to call up a friend and test out your lighting as well.
Look, I'm not ashamed to say I have 2 ring lights and 2 regular lights right now, just lighting.
Awesome.
Our marketing department would be proud of you, Emily. Did you have anything to add?
No, I think Danielle hit it. Just practice ahead of time, check what you've got, see how it's going to work out.
Perfect. Okay, so the next question is for Emily. What tips do you have about body language, eye contact, and limiting distractions during a virtual interview?
I think those are all like really important to make sure that you are not disturbed. It's not like a regular interview where you're in an office somewhere. If you're at your home, for me, like I'll make sure to obviously be in a room with the door shut, and I'll put a sign on the outside of the door saying, I'm having a live webinar right now, or I'm in an interview right now, so that other people in my house don't come in. You know, making sure my dog's not in here. It's never advice I thought I would have to tell people about interviewing, but my dog will bark if somebody comes to the door, so I try to make sure he's out. In terms of body language, one thing I have noticed when I'm working with people on Zoom is, since you are home and you're not on site, sometimes you can be a little too comfortable. So make sure that you're not, kind of slouching or sitting. And I see a lot of this too, like if people have a chair that moves, like moving around. So really try to have your feet on the floor, obviously facing forward. One thing I really try to focus on is making sure that my camera is eye level. So if that means I have to put my computer up on a couple of books, that's what I'll do. And then recognizing that when I look at the camera, that's when it looks like, for the person at the other end, it really looks like I'm making eye contact.
It's perfect. And a great way for students to practice body language, eye contact, etc., is through a resource that the Career Development Center also has called Interview Stream. And it can record you talking through interview questions on your computer. So you can kind of see, oh, am I saying too much? Am I moving? Am I slouching? It'll give you that feedback so you can see what you look like in an interview. So that resource will also be sent out to you after this info session as well.
And Kelsey, let me jump in and say, I also really recommend using Interview Stream if you have a video interview. So some of you may have received this before for a first interview, a link where you just log in and do an asynchronous recording of answering questions, and then the recruiter can watch it on their time. Speaking to the computer without a person at the other end is a very different experience, and you can really recreate that with Interview Stream.
Great tip. Thank you, Emily. Okay, so the next question is for Danielle. How early should one log into a virtual interview?
Yeah, so you definitely want to be a few minutes in advance. I would say honestly, probably 5 minutes in advance. If it's a Zoom interview, if someone set it up, they actually get an email once you logged in. So if you're too early, they'll get an email and they might feel kind of like rushed to go and they're not ready yet. Another trick is if you want to test everything before, just to see if the lighting's okay, the background's okay. If I have a presentation or something like that, I always just open Zoom and then just do a new meeting, so I can make sure that the lighting's okay, my background isn't distracted. But to the actual meeting, I wouldn't say any more than 5 to 10 minutes in advance.
Great advice. Thank you. So that concludes the questions for the virtual interviewing tips. If students have any questions and would like to unmute themselves or message the chat, I can say it on your behalf. We did have one question come in that was, what do you do when you go to an interview and the interviewer is not wearing a mask and you are uncomfortable? So in-person interviews during COVID.
So I think that that's just a great example of like a company culture situation, I would say at that point, you can definitely, excuse yourself or ask if they wear a mask. And then that would definitely be something that I would address with the recruiter or HR or whoever organized the interview. Dexcom is not currently doing on-site interviews right now. So that's something that we try to address by making all of them virtual. But I would say definitely if you are uncomfortable, then I would just voice that in a respectful way. Just say like, hey, I would love if you would like, do you have a mask? Things like that. But if it makes you uncomfortable, I would definitely let HR know.
Great tips. Thank you, Danielle. Emily, do you have anything you'd like to add to that one?
Just shock. Sorry if somebody's had to deal with that.
Yeah.
Great.
Not the question I thought was going to be asked.
It's a good question, though. Good place to ask those uncomfortable questions, because we are here to give you advice and help you through those situations. So thank you for asking that.
Yeah. And one thing I would add into is feel free to make an appointment with one of us in the Career Center, because we can help walk through the situation in a little more detail and give you some practice. I think sometimes with those uncomfortable situations, it is additionally uncomfortable because there's a power dynamic. Often it feels like that person who's interviewing you has the power and you don't. But so we can role play some ways to address that and find a comfortable way for you to either extricate yourself from that situation or manage it. But Danielle had awesome suggestions.
Perfect.
Something that you made me think of, I mean, we're all usually a lot more concerned about leaving a good impression on the interviewer and making them think you're a good fit for the company. But when they're like, what are some red flags that as an interviewee you might see that you can't really work around, that kind of show this company is not somewhere that you should even want to work at? Like, you're just not a good fit.
Great question. Thank you for asking that. I'll let the panelists answer, but thank you for unmuting and speaking.
Yeah, I think that that's an awesome question. I always tell candidates that you're interviewing the company just as much as they're interviewing you. So that's a lot about what's important to you. And we'll get to this a little bit further down, but the questions that you're going to be asking definitely should be kind of catered around what you're looking for. So if you ask them about what qualities do you look for this particular position, and they say someone who, I don't know, works really hard and has no trouble going overtime, but you really value work-life balance, then that's probably not the best position for you. And that's okay. That's probably the best position for somebody else. Those are kind of just examples. Really shape your questions around what you're looking for and what's important to you for a company. And I think that that's where the red flags will kind of uncover themselves.
Thank you.
Yeah, I totally agree with Danielle. And I think sometimes you can do some research ahead of time too on sites like Glassdoor. Just being able to kind of see what the interview process is like or what the company culture is like ahead of time. If you're not sure if a job is legitimate, like if it's with a company you haven't heard of before, and if it's that kind of red flag issue, we have a list of some ways to check out what companies and jobs might be legitimate that Kelsey can include, I think, in that email she sends you. But I agree, it comes down to values. So sometimes it's going to be more subtle, but really trusting kind of how you feel during the interview and how the people you interact with make you feel. I think those are all really important ways to kind of start gauging what that company culture might be like and whether or not it's a good fit for you.
Thank you to both of you. Those are helpful answers. Definitely good things to think about. So thank you.
And yes, I will include we have a fraudulent employer potential red flags PDF. So I will include that in the follow-up email as well. We had another question come in. How do you know when to stop speaking properly in regards to a response to a question or asking a question? In other words, when to know when you said enough?
So this question is kind of case by case. you definitely want to make sure that you're getting all the information out there, but you want to make sure that you're being as concise as possible. It really just kind of depends on the question. So I would just say that you should be prepared. I would say create like a bunch of answers to common behavioral interview questions, and then go ahead and practice those with your career center or whatever, and they can help you gauge kind of that sweet spot. Really, I think it's practice makes perfect, but I wouldn't say that you should be talking longer than a couple minutes to the answer of the question.
Yeah, I totally agree. I think 2 minutes is about, we don't usually know how long we're speaking, but if you do interview stream and you can kind of play back, see if your answers are long enough. If you're worried that you're rambling, because sometimes that's the concern, is like, I'm talking too long. What I'll tell students then is take a moment when you first hear the question, take a breath, and think during that breath, where am I going to go with this answer? So think right away, what's the end? And then you can tell the story or give the example, knowing that you're going to end on that result or whatever that piece is. If you kind of know where you're going, then you can wrap it up.
Great advice from both of you. And something we'll discuss later is how you answer certain interview questions. And I think that structure kind of helps put into a condensed version of this is what you should really focus on getting across an interview question, and that can help you as well. But I think practicing is great because then you can see, oh, where am I putting too much context and added information in, and where can I subtract? So thank you for asking that question. Okay, for the purpose of time, I'm going to move on to the next section, but again, we'll have general Q&A at the end, so you can always come back to this section as well. So I'm going to share my screen to share the next set of questions. Day of interview, how to make a strong first impression. I know we just talked about impressions, so this will be a good one to go off of that. How do you answer the behavior-based interview questions, and what are they? What are some of the most common questions an interviewer asks in an interview? And what are good questions students can ask during an interview? So kind of tying in a few of the items we just discussed, but we'll do it a little bit more formally now as well. So the first question, how does a student make a strong first impression, is for both panelists.
I feel like I've been going first, so I can go ahead. So making a strong first impression, I would say really nail all of the things that we talked about just before. Make sure you're dressed appropriately with a proper background, and then come prepared to answer those two questions. Like I said, I typically ask them first, what do you know about X company, and why are you interested in this position? Nailing those right off the bat, I would be definitely impressed. And just try to have as much relaxed confidence as possible and be yourself. Try to connect with the interviewer if you can, because at the end of the day, I mean, I know Emily said there is kind of this weird power dynamic in an interview, but it's really just two people having a conversation. And you're going to end up, if you receive the offer, you're going to end up working with that person. So you definitely want to try to connect with them.
I agree. I think that first impression, so much of it is being on time, being dressed appropriately, have your background ready, have your questions prepared, be prepped and ready to go, and be polite and attentive.
Perfect. Thank you both. So the next question is for Emily. How do you answer behavioral-based interview questions? And can you also define what a behavioral interview question is?
Sure. So a lot of you have maybe had these questions before in interviews, but it's basically a question that's asking you to describe a specific situation. So they often are questions like, tell me about a time when, or give me an example of when you were on a team and your leadership was challenged, something along those lines. So when you are answering a behavior-based question, you want to pick one specific example to use. So be careful not to fall on saying, oh, that would happen a lot in this past job, and here's how we handled it. That's more of a generality. You want to give one specific time. There's a format or a structure to answering these questions that really helps, and this will be in the materials that Kelsey sends you as well, but it's called the STAR format. So the S and the T stand for situation and task, the A is for action, and the R is for result. And so really what you're doing is describing the situation or the task that is asked for in the question, and then describing the actions you took. So that first part is really a very natural way to answer the question, and people definitely will go into that, describing those different aspects. But what happens sometimes is people get lost in the action. So they're describing the situation, they don't know how to end it, they keep talking about more things that they did in this situation. A great way to end is with a result. So what that means is if somebody says, tell me about a time you worked on a team with a challenging team member. I'll make this very short, but basically the situation or task, you might say, I had a marketing project in my class last semester with 4 team members and one of the team members stopped showing up for meetings. So that's the situation or task. The action, now you describe what you did to try to solve that problem. I reached out individually to the person to see if the time was a conflict or a problem for them. I found out that they were having a problem with some of their other classes. So I worked with them I connected them with a friend who could help tutor them in the calculus class that was giving them, taking up so much of their time. So those are the actions. And then the result would be what happened because of that. Because I was able to help him manage his course load, he was able to rejoin the group and we finished the project on time. So that's a very simplified answer, but it's showing you kind of those are the different segments that you want to include. And a lot of recruiters are also trained in this particular style of interviewing, and they will look for the result. And they'll sometimes even ask a follow-up question trying to get you to give that result if you don't provide it in the beginning with the first answer. I'm sure Danielle can add on to that.
Yeah, definitely when I started recruiting my first job, they gave me, I saw Kelsey had sent it over, they gave me that exact document. And they definitely, when they were teaching me how to interview, they were like, if they don't give the result, ask for it. So Emily is exactly right there.
Perfect. Thank you for describing that and doing an example of that, Emily. The next question is for Danielle. What are some of the most common questions you ask in an interview?
So in addition to those two that I have mentioned over and over, I also a lot of the times will ask to explain a project that you've worked on in school, especially coming right out of college, or if it's an internship position, we understand that you don't have a ton of experience. So we really just want to be able to have a good understanding of what you've been working on in school. So for example, I know a lot of like science or engineering students have like a capstone project. So that's a perfect example. We want to make sure that you're able to articulate exactly what you've done, and so that we can have a good understanding of your capabilities. Additional questions, a lot of behavioral questions are very classic. Yeah, tell me about a time you dealt with a difficult coworker or team member. For this, I just want to emphasize that it's okay if it doesn't come from an internship. It's okay if it comes from a time at school, if it came from experience with an org or sports or something like that. We're really just looking for how you handle that type of situation, basically. And then another good example that I use is, or another question rather, is tell me about a time you received negative feedback. So for that, we're really looking for how you reacted and incorporated the feedback.
Those are great questions to prepare for as well. And something I think I did when I was going through the interview process, which I would recommend to students, is take the job description and look at like the key action words and see, okay, what are questions that they might ask about with this? Oh, there's a lot of communication or collaboration between departments. Okay, they may ask me a behavioral interview question about collaborating with others. When did I do that? How can I prep for that? And just kind of go through line by line with the job description and see, all right, what examples do I have on hand that I can use if they ask me a question on this specific task in the job? So I think the questions that Danielle provided are really good interview wants to prep as well, and those can be incorporated into those study portions of preparing for the interview too. So the next and last question of this section is for Danielle as well. What are good questions students can ask during an interview or during an interview to an interviewer?
Some good questions that you can ask is, what qualities do you think are important for this role? This will give you a little bit more insight into what this person's looking for. And it'll also give you an opportunity to kind of elaborate on how you're a good fit as well. What does success in this role look like? Or how will this person be evaluated in this role? What do you foresee to be some challenges? And then, of course, you can always ask, what's your team's culture? Or what's your leadership style? And then that can help you kind of decipher the fit. And then lastly, not to give you too many, is what are the next steps and what is the timeline? Because I know a lot of the times people don't hear back right away. So they get worried or they think that they're no longer in consideration. But at least if you ask this question, then you'll be able to have some sort of an idea of when you will be hearing back.
You took my example right out from me, Danielle. I always voice ask about the timeline and the next steps, because I think that's super important to understand. Okay, am I going to be going to another interview for this? Is the next step that I'm going to be hearing a yes or no answer? And it also gives you some idea of what is their time frame. If they're continuing to do interviews for the rest of the week, then you know, okay, I won't be hearing until the end of the week because they have more people to interview as well. So, and kind of on that note too, something I would definitely recommend to students is create an Excel sheet with all the jobs that you are applying for or internships, because you may be applying to a lot of opportunities and you want to keep track of what have you applied to, where did you apply to them, whether that was on Indeed or Handshake directly on the site. Any login information you may have for that site is good to note. Any contacts you may have, and then also the status. So like, oh, I interviewed on November 2nd and they said that I'd hear back in 2 weeks. You can kind of take that as a cue or as a reminder, oh, it's been 2 weeks. Maybe I should follow up with them now because that's the timeline that they gave me. So it's just a really good way to keep track of what you're doing and where you're at with the process of every position too. Okay.
Also, add one more thing to that too, because I always recommend students keep track of what they're applying to. Also, when you first find a job that you're applying for, download or save as a PDF that job description, because by the time you get called for an interview, it may not be posted anymore. And then I've had many students saying, I don't remember what the job was. That's a little more challenging to prepare for the interview.
Definitely good advice. And you can either download it or copy paste the words into a Word document too if you can't download it. So thank you, Emily. Okay, that concludes the day of interview prep, or day of interview, how to stand out in interview tips. So if there are any questions regarding day of actions, please feel free to unmute or chat them.
Would you say bringing a notepad and taking notes could be helpful or distracting in an interview?
Go ahead,
So
Daniel.
it depends. I would say it depends. I feel like taking notes is always a good thing because you might want to take note of things that you hear in the interview that you like about the company or that you don't like, or, coming prepared with those questions, write them out so you don't have to memorize them. And then you can write the answers right there. It is kind of, a balance between jotting down notes and also listening. But I would always just recommend to bring it. It shows that you're interested and you genuinely want to learn more. But yeah, I know sometimes it is a balance.
Yeah, agreed. And I just say, if you're going to take notes, just at least let people know or ask. Say, do you mind if I take some notes while we're talking, so they know why you're looking down, but definitely still, especially while you're virtual, definitely looking toward the camera, a significant amount of time.
That's actually really good advice. I realize they don't even see if they don't know what you're doing when you're actually taking notes. So I guess it's helpful to actually ask. Thank you.
Sure.
Are there any other questions about day of interview?
But how many after interview questions would you recommend we ask? I know there might not be a set number, but should you come with 2, 3, or 4, or is 1 or 2 okay? I don't know.
No, great question. Thank you. Danielle or Emily, did you want to answer that?
I mean, I would definitely prepare multiple questions. If there's time, then I was able to ask them. I think it really shows that you've prepared, but then know that you may only have time to ask 1 or 2. But I think if you can show that you've prepared some questions ahead of time, particularly if they're directed toward the position or the company, I think that can only be helpful. But Danielle can speak experience from the other side of the desk.
Yeah, I always recommend people to prepare. And this might sound like a lot, but I would recommend you to prepare 5 at a minimum. I'd say 5 to 10, because during the interview, they might answer your questions. So you don't want to only have maybe 2 or 3, and then they already answer the questions throughout the interview, and then you get to the end and you don't have any to ask. So prepare those, but then of course, being mindful of their time, you don't want to ask too many questions. I would say, be prepared to ask 5 questions if time allows. But yeah, I would definitely prepare more than less.
I think preparing more than less is great, and maybe rank them, what's most important question that if they don't answer it during the rest of the interview that you definitely want to ask before you leave. And then maybe rank them down, okay, if I don't get this one answered, it's not going to be a deal breaker or anything for me.
Got it. Thank you. That's really helpful.
The next question that came in is, it's always best to learn from others' mistakes instead of making them ourselves. What's an interview blunder that you have all witnessed? Danielle, do you want to take that one?
Sure. So the part about saying to download the job description or save the job description is definitely the number one. When I was graduating, I applied to every position I thought I was even remotely qualified for. And then come the interview, same thing. I was like, oh my God, the job's not posted anymore. I have no idea what I'm interviewing for. So I couldn't answer the questions where they were like, why do you think you're a good fit for this role? So I had to give very general answers, and that's not the best experience. Companies really want you to be interested in them and in that role specifically. So I would say that that's definitely the biggest thing, is people not knowing what they're interviewing for.
Yeah, I think when I'm interviewing, I agree with, some of these or people who don't know the company, not really sure what the company does. We hear that from recruiters sometimes, that the students just did not even know what the product was or anything like that. So doing some of that research. One thing that I always notice too, or that catches me, is you want to find that balance of telling your experience and making sure that they see that you're a strong candidate without overselling yourself as some sort of perfection option. A question that we ask sometimes, or I ask when I'm interviewing, is what part of this role do you think will be most challenging for you? And I'm always concerned when somebody says nothing, I think it's going to be great, because I want to see what I'm looking for. There's some insight. So some self-awareness. So being able to say, I feel confident that I'd be able to learn these areas, but probably the area that's going to be most challenging for me is X, and I know that being able to take some classes on that and getting some mentoring on the job will really help me. So you can still talk about it in a positive way, but I do want to see a little bit of humility.
And it shows awareness too of your skill set and where you may need to grow, and that's totally fine to grow in your role as well. So good example, Emily. I think something that I would also suggest, which I know was a struggle for me in undergrad and interviewing for internships and everything, is if there's a question that you fumble on and you kind of lose confidence on, don't let that affect the rest of the interview, because you just get that confidence back, take a breath, know that it's okay that you fumbled on one question, but don't let it affect the rest, because it'll show, one, you have resilience to bounce back from not quite knowing how to answer something, but then it'll also give you time to be like, you know what, I'm human, I can do the rest, and I will stand out. So don't lose that confidence throughout the interview.
Yeah, and I will say, to kind of add on to that, just because you don't know the answer to the question does not mean that you failed the interview. I used to work for a staffing agency, so I would work with the candidate as well as the employer. And after the interview, she called me. She was like, oh my gosh, they started asking me all these questions I didn't know, and they were really technical. And so she totally thought she blew the interview. And when I spoke with the employer, they were like, no, like her interview was going so well that we thought she would have been qualified for a higher level. That's why we asked her these questions, to see if we could put her into a higher level. I mean, regardless, she got the job, but don't worry if you don't know the answer, basically.
That's a great example. Thank you, Danielle. Okay, for time, I'm going to move to post-interview, and then we'll open up for questions. So this is the last section for today. The post-interview questions that we'll ask are, how important is it to send a thank you note? Is email okay? And besides a thank you note, how should students follow up with an interview, and how frequently should they do so? So the first question is for both of you. How important is a thank you, and is an email okay?
So for thank you notes, on one hand, I've hired quite a few people who didn't do thank you notes. But on the other, if all things are equal, and one candidate writes a really well thought out and personalized thank you note, it could kind of edge them out. So I would just say that it shows interest, it shows follow through. Email is definitely okay, unless you're going to, if it's an in-person interview and you're going to go to your car and write the thank you note and then walk back in and give it to the lobby or whatever. I would say that email is definitely okay, and almost even preferred, because it's just so much faster. Sometimes hiring decisions are made that same day, so you don't want to, be a couple days late on that.
Yep, I think writing a thank you note is just a great way to reinforce your interest in the position, but also to express appreciation to your recruiter and the time that they have taken to speak with you. It's a way to show that you were listening, and you can really reflect some of that back. And, as Danielle mentioned earlier, this is going to be your coworker. You want to show that you're going to be a really kind and respectful coworker.
Great advice. Thank you all. And something that'll help with that as well is that one question we talked about of, what's your timeline? What are the next steps? Because if you know the timeline is short, an email is going to be the quickest and most efficient way to show that appreciation and thank them for the opportunity to interview. If you know the timeline's a little bit longer, you could maybe handwrite it and bring it back to the office. So that gives you a little insight into, okay, what's the best way for me to respond? Okay, the last question is, besides the thank you note, how should students follow up after an interview, and how frequently should they follow up? And I'll give this one to Danielle.
So after an interview, I would say probably follow up. If you do remember to ask the question on timeline, they'll usually say like, oh, we'll have a decision by X date. If you don't hear, then you can follow up then. If they don't give you a timeline, I would say wait like around a week, I would say, and just ask them, if there was a decision made or what next steps are. You can even ask them if they have any questions for you. But I would say follow up probably twice. If you don't get a response, I would say probably move forward with your job search and continue to look. That's just the unfortunate reality, is sometimes, employers don't get back to everyone, and that's unfortunate. I try my best to get back to everyone, but is not always something that's within your control. Sometimes there's like 300 applicants for one position, and it's just really difficult to get back to everyone. But I would say probably a week, and just follow up with emails.
Great. Thank you, Danielle. Emily, did you have anything to add before we move to Q&A? Okay, perfect. So I want to open it up to Q&A. So feel free to unmute yourself or text the chat either privately or to everyone, and I can read it aloud for you, whatever you're most comfortable with. But this is your time. Ask us all the questions that you need, and we are here to help.
While people are typing their questions, I actually have a question for Danielle. I did think of one. When is it appropriate for a student to connect with you on LinkedIn? Like if they're applying for a position or if they're interviewing, should they wait till they get the job offer? What do you suggest?
Yeah. So personally, I can only speak for myself. I don't particularly mind when students connect with me on LinkedIn. The only thing there is that I get a lot of requests. So if we do have like an interaction and I provided my email address to Kelsey, so she'll send that out later. I do prefer email because I know if you have my email address, then we definitely like connected at an event like this or spoke on the phone or something like that. But typically I don't really mind it, like whenever they connect with me on LinkedIn.
And what if you had a candidate that went maybe to the next level of interviews and they're interviewing maybe with a hiring manager? Is that appropriate for them after that interview to reach out with a personalized LinkedIn request? Or again, is that something they should wait for? These are questions I'm like, I don't know.
Yeah, no, these are great questions. And unfortunately, I think that a lot of them are very specific to the person. Because LinkedIn, unfortunately, it's kind of like, I mean, it's still a social media platform. It's obviously professional, but it's always kind of like, oh, when do I follow that person on Instagram or when do I add them on Facebook? It's really specific to the person. You know, I would definitely recommend, I mean, LinkedIn is great because you want to look at the person that you're interviewing with, know their background, do research on that. That's something that you'll probably want to do. The connection, I would say just to be safe, definitely after you've met and, you know, just use your best judgment on if you want to connect with them before or after you hear back. Because at the end of the day, you definitely left an impression on them and you want to make sure that it's a good impression, I guess.
Do you think it's appropriate at the end of an interview to say, would it be okay if I connected with you on LinkedIn? So that way they know by person if it's okay?
Yeah, I think that would be okay. I mean, oftentimes they'll give you like a business card and things like that. So I think it's okay definitely at that point to be like, are you okay if we connect on LinkedIn?
Okay, great. We did have a student question come in. What level of specificity is ideal for an answer? Do you ever hear answers that seem almost too good or too exact to be true?
In terms of specificity, I'm kind of wondering, like, just for like the behavioral questions, or so I guess I never really hear answers that I feel like are too good or too exact to be true. I mean, I can definitely tell when a candidate is prepared or not. So I can sometimes tell like, oh, this person thought about this, you know, and they're giving an answer that's, they've already thought of an example for a question like this. I personally take that as a good sign.
Great, thank you. Are there any other student questions? Feel free to chat or unmute. To go along with the above, is it bad to sound like you are reading off the computer's the company's website?
I wouldn't say that it's bad. I mean, try to be as genuine as possible. It's a good interview will be kind of flowing, like more of a conversation. It's really like an exploratory conversation of they'll learn more about you, what are your skills, how do you handle certain problems. So it's okay to have like a rehearsed answer, but I wouldn't recommend reading off the website.
Thank you. Do you ever ask questions to throw people off?
I personally do not. I do know, though, I've heard stories of other people asking questions to throw people off, but personally, I don't do that. I don't recommend that to managers when they interview people. That's like, again, that comes down to a culture. I very much approach interviews as I want to get to know the person. I want to understand their experience. If this is a right mutual fit, not are we going to throw this person off?
That's great. Thank you. I did just put in the chat a link for students. Please fill this out. We'd love to hear your feedback about this event. So it'll only take like 5 to 10 minutes. Please make sure to fill that out before you leave. But we are still here for 7 minutes, so feel free to ask more questions. You have Danielle here, who's an expert, and Emily as well, so who's also an expert. So feel free to ask both of them questions.
Hi, I have a question. Do you have any, I guess, like advice or tips on people that have just been applying and they'll get that, thanks for applying, but we went with someone more qualified, but you have the experience, like, just what do you recommend to go like from there?
Good question.
So from the employer side, what I can tell you is there are so many reasons why you could have gotten that email. Even if you're completely qualified, if your resume totally mirrors the job description, they could have canceled that job because of so many different reasons, like COVID, for example. A ton of companies canceled internships or other positions. They could have already had someone who was further along in the process. That position could be on hold. They could up level that position. They could down level that position. So unfortunately, there's so many factors that are outside your control of getting that email. So the only thing I can tell you is just to continue to apply to positions, leverage your networks as much as possible, be open to opportunities that may not be like exactly what you thought. I was a biology major and I became a recruiter. So just be open and keep applying and be prepared once that interview does come.
Absolutely, and I would add on or expand on one thing Danielle said, which is leverage your network. I encourage students and my clients to diversify your job search as much as possible. So part of it's going to be looking online and applying for jobs. But that can be soul killing, as you might be experiencing, because it's just a numbers thing. You're going to apply to a lot of things and not hear back or hear those rejections. So I really try to balance that job search with doing informational interviews, going to events where you can talk to human beings, whether that's a career fair or different networking events, but really looking at your building your online network, looking at people you know, but looking at people you don't know who maybe just happen to be alumni as well. But so really, it takes a lot more work to reach out and do all those steps, but the payoff can be really huge because then you're connected with a human who sees your value, they can recommend you to other people, and you kind of get out of the applicant tracking system level.
Thank you both. Another student that came in was, what's your favorite and least favorite question to ask during an interview?
I would say my favorite question to ask is always, I know it's like not as formal, but just getting to know the person, whether it's what kind of environments do you thrive in, even just the beginning conversations and the ending conversations. But really just asking them, what are you interested in? What kind of company culture are you looking for? I think that those are very telling of the person themselves and if they're going to be a good cultural fit for our company. My least favorite question to ask, and unfortunately it is a reality that we do ask this quite a bit, is about salary expectations, just because it's always such a uncomfortable subject for a lot of people. For me, I've had it so many times where it's not uncomfortable for me anymore, but I hate making the candidate uncomfortable. So that's probably my least favorite one.
If you'd like to learn more about salary negotiation, we have a offer negotiations 101 session tomorrow during Torero hours. So that'll be in the follow-up email as well. You can sign up for that. Thank you, Danielle, for the segue plug into that.
Totally planned.
Are there any other questions? We have 2 minutes left, so please utilize us while we're here.
I know Kelsey will say this, but I just want to thank Danielle for coming and joining us today with all her wisdom, and as an alum. We love having an alumna on the panel, and someone who's been in there where they are now. Super vital. So yeah, thank you, Danielle.
Thank you, Danielle.
Thank you guys for having me. This was awesome.
Good. It's always great to have alumni back, and you did a great job, so thank you.
Oh, thank you.
All the students are saying thank you now too.
Oh,
I always love that at the end of the events, just seeing all of that. So. Okay, well, I'll let everyone go a minute early. Thank you all for coming. Have a wonderful night. I know finals are coming up, so good luck with all of your studying. And thanks for coming. Good luck with your interviews. Hopefully you have a few.